welcome to part 3 of my interview with David Bentley Hart. Hart has argued that an ethical theory constructed apart from some account of transcendent truth is a fragile fiction. So I asked him, why can't humans construct a workable ethics without appealing to the spiritual?
Well, perhaps they can. Whether they must or not is a different question. That sentence was really just an exhortation to honesty, intellectual honesty, because it's quite possible for people not to believe in God, certainly, or the good beyond being, and to be perfectly decent human beings, and on that basis it might be perfectly possible to create a society in which we interfere with each other as little as possible and treat each other with respect and look after one another. But having said that, it just seems to me that there are a great number of rather facile assumptions that operate in a great deal of the more evangelically secularist literature that's on the bestsellers list these days. The truth is, we work with a model of freedom in the modern age that has a history, a theological history stretching back to the 14th century at least, and a secular philosophical history going back probably to the late 15th century, which defines freedom not in the classical sense as the power of a being to realize its nature by growing into greater conformity with the good as such. We don't assume we have a nature, we don't assume the good as such is anything other than a cultural construction. Rather, freedom consists in the unrestrained, spontaneous power of the self to construct for itself the ends it desires, and then to pursue them with as little interference as possible to the greatest extent of its power. If that's true, if we're working with that model of freedom, the pretense that there's just some obviously self-evident system of ethics out there that all rational persons will agree on because it's good for us, is absurd. It may be. It has been. Catastrophically has been the case in the 20th century that they say, well, it's not interested in what's good for us. We're interested in what's good for me, or for the German people, or for the utopia of the future, and all the political products of this model of freedom in the modern age have vied with one another. There's cultural banality, there's monstrosity, the prodigies of evil, that the pursuit of the will to power, which is a sort of organically magnified notion of this idea of freedom, have produced. We don't produce greatness, sadly. You're not going to get the Renaissance probably without a tyrant or two. It's just the nature of human beings that greatness often comes about as a result of constraints and compulsions. But we could create a decent enough secular culture, although then we'd have endless and unadjudicable arguments about who gets to be part of that, like, children that we might think are born handicapped, should they be born, the unborn, the elderly, And there's absolutely no index of moral truth. There's no intelligible way of arguing these things within the context of what we understand freedom and the good to be. And just to assume that the future will look like what we in our good sort of post-Enlightenment way expect it to look like, if we're all good secularists, I think is worse than quixotic.